During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about why farmers like so much to put manure on their fields.
Well, manure is one of those things. When we were growing up on the farm, we had cattle, we had hogs, and we had crop ground. So you're feeding these animals. The animals have manure that they're producing, and you got to do something with the manure, right? Well, if you test that manure and find out what the nutrient value is, it's actually really high in nutrients. And so for farmers, it makes a lot of sense to put that manure out into their fields where the plants can eventually use those nutrients.
Okay, so Darren brought up a couple of things there. The first thing I would mention is you have to get rid of the manure. So if you are the crop farmer and you also are the livestock producer and you're one and the same, well, your first thought is probably, well, I just got to get rid of this stuff. I got to get rid of my manure. But then to Darren's point, we have such a great fertilizer source, and now instead of having to spend a whole bunch of money on commercial fertilizer, we can get this manure and we produced it ourselves. That's awesome. Our biggest concern a lot of times for farmers is putting too much on a small area. So usually we will advise farmers, hey, test that manure like Darren said, and then spread it out appropriately on lots of acres and supplement with commercial fertilizer.
This is one of the things when we were growing up. We were a relatively small family farm and still are kind of an average sized family farm, but we had manure from cattle and from hogs. And you think, oh boy, that's a lot of manure. No, we didn't have that much livestock. We had enough farm ground that we could spread the manure out on all our fields and it was fine. But you're right, if you get out of balance where you've got a lot of livestock and not much farm ground, that can be a challenge.
Well, the number one thing is salt. We just worry about getting too much salt in that ground, especially on ground that's poorly drained. Salts are leachable, so if you have good drainage, lots of rainfall, the salts flush out. It's not a real big deal. But if you start overloading it, like the other day, Darren and I had a question from a farmer, and he wanted to put on so much manure, it would have been like 2,500 pounds of salt per acre, and usually our limit is 500 pounds of salt per acre. So we're going, oh no, that's too much. You actually could do harm to that crop.
Well, we've talked about kind of some dry manure situations, but I want to talk about liquid manure for a second, because sometimes you go by, let's just say a dairy, and you see a liquid lagoon out there with manure in it, and you think, oh my goodness, what do you do with the liquid manure? Well, actually, what farmers can do is pump that manure out. So they'll stir it up so it gets to be a consistent formulation out in the manure pit, and they'll pump it out into their fields. And then with equipment that's going to inject it deep into the soil, they can apply it and avoid most of the problems with spreading manure on top of the ground and all the odor and the flies and everything that are possible with that.
All right, Darren mentioned odor. That's really one of the biggest things, and our advice to farmers is always get that manure buried, get it deep down in the ground as quickly as you possibly can, because if you can smell the manure, what you're actually smelling is lost nitrogen. We don't want to lose that nitrogen, that ammonia. If we can keep it in the soil, then we get the benefit of that for our next crop. There are also microbial products that can be used now in lagoons like Darren was talking about, and a lot of farmers are composting their dry manure. That also makes it so it doesn't smell as bad, and it is a nutrient-rich product.
Well, manure is nutrient rich. That's why a lot of farmers are utilizing that in their farm ground. One of the things, though, that comes with manure oftentimes is extra weeds. And if you've got our Weed of the Week, you'll need to get it under control. We'll show you how later in the show.